Chapter 5 of The Song of the Cardinal by Jane Stratton-Porter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. See here, demanded the Cardinal. The mandate repeatedly rang from the topmost twig of the thorn tree. And yet the Cardinal was not in earnest. He was beside himself with a new and delightful excitement, and he found it impossible to refrain from giving vent to his feelings. He was commanding the farmer and every furred and feathered denizen of the river bottom to see. Then he fought like a wild thing if any of them ventured close, for great things were happening in the sumac. In past days the Cardinal had brooded an hour every morning while his mate went to take her exercise, bathe and fluff in the sun parlour. He had gone to her that morning as usual, and she looked at him with anxious eyes and refused to move. He hopped to the very edge of the nest and repeatedly urged her to go. She only ruffled her feathers and nested the eggs she was brooded to turn them, but did not offer to leave. The Cardinal reached over and gently nudged her with his beak, to remind her that it was his time to brood, but she looked at him almost savagely and gave him a sharp peck, so that he knew she was not to be bothered. He carried her every dainty he could find and hovered near her, tense with anxiety. It was late in the afternoon before she went after the drink for which she was half famished. She scarcely had reached a willow and bent over the water before the Cardinal was on the edge of the nest. He examined it closely, but he could see no change. He leaned to give the eggs careful scrutiny, and from somewhere there came to him the faintest little chip he had ever heard. Up went the Cardinal's crest, and he dashed to the willow. There was no danger in sight, and his mate was greedily dipping her rosy beak in the water. He went back to the cradle and listened intently, and again that feeble cry came to him. Under the nest, around it, and all through the sumac he searched, until at last, completely baffled, he came back to the edge. The sound was so much plainer there, that he suddenly leaned, caressing the eggs with his beak, and then the Cardinal knew. He had heard the first faint cries of his shell-encased babies. With a wild scream he made a flying leap through the air. His heart was beating to suffocation. He started in a race down the river. If he alighted on a bush he took only one swing, and springing from it flamed on in headlong flight. He flashed to the top of the tallest tulip tree, and cried cloudward to the lark, "See here! See here!" He dashed to the river bank and told the killdeers, and then visited the underbrush, and informed the thrushes and the wood robins. Father tender, he grew so delirious with joy that he forgot his habitual aloofness, and fraternized with every bird beside the shining river. He even laid aside his customary caution, went chipping into the sumac, and caressed his mate so boisterously she gazed at him severely and gave his wing a savage pull to recall him to his sober senses. That night the Cardinal slept in the sumac, very close to his mate, and he shut only one eye at a time. Early in the morning, when he carried her the first food, he found that she was on the edge of the nest, dropping bits of shell outside, and creeping to peep, he saw the tiniest coral baby with closed eyes and little patches of soft silky down. Its beak was wide open, and though his heart was even fuller than the previous day, the Cardinal knew what that meant, and instead of indulging in another celebration, he assumed the duties of paternity, and began searching for food, for now there were 2 empty crops in his family. On the following day there were 4. Then he really worked. How eagerly he searched, and how gladly he flew to the sumac with every rare morsel. The babies were too small for the mother to leave, and for the first few days the Cardinal was constantly on wing. If he could not find sufficiently dainty food for them in the trees or bushes, or among the offerings of the farmer, He descended to earth in search like a wood robin. He forgot he needed a bath or owned a sun parlor. But everywhere he went, from his full heart, there constantly burst the cry, "See here! See here!" His mate made never a sound. Her eyes were bigger and softer than ever, and in them glowed a steady love light. She hovered over those 3 red mites of nestlings so tenderly. She was so absorbed in feeding, stroking, and coddling them she neglected herself until she became quite lean. When the Cardinal came every few minutes with food, she was a picture of love and gratitude for his devoted attention, and once she reached over and softly kissed his wing. "See here! See here!" shrilled the Cardinal, and in his ecstasy he again forgot himself and sang in the sumac. Then he carried food with greater activity than ever to cover his laps. The farmer knew that it lacked an hour of noon, but he was so anxious to tell Maria the news that he could not endure the suspense another minute. There was a new song from the sumac. He heard it as he eagerly turned the first corner with the shovel plow. He had listened eagerly and caught the meaning almost at once. "See here! See here!" He tied the old gray mare to the fence to prevent her from eating the young corn, and went immediately. By leaning a rail against the thorn tree he was able to peer into the sumac, and take a good look at the nest of the handsome birdlings, now well screened with the umbrella-like foliage. It seemed to Abram that he never could wait until noon. He critically examined the harness, in the hope that he would find a buckle missing, and tried to discover a flaw in the plow that would send him to the barn for a file. But he could not invent an excuse for going. So when he had waited until an hour of noon, he could endure it no longer. "Got news for you, Maria," he called from the well where he was making a pretense of thirst. "Oh, I don't know," answered Maria, with a superior smile. "If it's about the redbirds, he's been up to the garden 3 times this morning, yellin', 'See here!' fit to spit. And I jest figured that their little ones had hatched. Is that your news?" "Well, I be durned!" gasped the astonished Abram. Mid-afternoon Abram turned Nancy and started the plow down a row that led straight to the sumac. He intended to stop there, tie to the fence, and go to the river bank in the shade for a visit with the Cardinal. It was very warm, and he was feeling the heat so much that in his heart he knew he would be glad to reach the end of the row and rest he had promised himself. The quick nervous strokes of the dinner bell, clang, clang, came cutting the air clearly and sharply. Abram stopped Nancy with a jerk. It was the warning Maria had promised to send him if she saw prowlers with guns. He shaded his eyes with his hand and scanned the points of the compass through narrow lids with concentrated vision. He first caught a glimpse of light playing on a gun barrel, and then he could discern the figure of a man clad in hunter's outfit leisurely walking down the lane toward the river. Abram hastily hitched Nancy to the fence, making the best time he could. He reached the opposite corner and was nibbling the midrib of a young corn blade and placidly viewing the landscape where the hunter passed. "Howdy," he said in an even, cordial voice. The hunter walked on without lifting his eyes or making audible reply to Abram's friendly, old-fashioned heart. This seemed the rankest discourtesy, and there was a flash in his eyes and a certain quality in his voice. He lifted a hand for parley. "Hold a minute, my friend," he said. "Since you are on my premises, might I be privileged to ask you if you've seen a few signs I have posted pertaining the use of a gun?" "I am not blind," replied the hunter, "and my education has been looked after to the extent that I can make out your notices, from the number and size of them. I think I could do it, old man, if I had no eyes." The scarcely suppressed sneer and the old man grated on Abram's nerves amazingly, for a man of 60 years of peace. The gleam in his eyes grew stronger, and there was a perceptible lift of his shoulders as he answered, "I mean 'em to be read and understood. From the main road passin' that cabin up there on the bank straight to the river, and from the furmost line o' this field to the same, is my premises, and on every foot of 'em the signs are in full force. They're in a little fuller force in June, when half the bushes and tufts o' grass are housin' a young bird family, than at any other time. They're sort o' upholdin' the Legislator Act, providin' for the protection o' game and singin' birds. And maybe it would be well for you to notice 'at I'm not so old but am able to stand up for my right to any livin' man." There certainly was an added tinge of respect in the hunter's tones as he asked, "Would you consider it trespassing if a man simply crossed your land, following the line of the fences, to reach the farm of a friend?" "Certainly not!" cried Abram, cordial in his relief. "To be sure not! Glad to have you convenience yourself. I only want to jest call to your notice 'at the birds are protected on this farm." "I have no intention of interfering with your precious birds, I assure you," replied the hunter. "And if you require an explanation of the gun in June, I confess I did hope to be able to pick off a squirrel for a very sick friend. But I suppose for even such a cause it would not be allowed on your premises." "Oh, pshaw now!" said Abram. "Man alive! I'm not unreasonable. O' course in a case of sickness I'd be glad if you'd run across a squirrel. All I want to do is have a clear understanding about the birds. Good luck and good day to you." Abram started across the field to Nancy, but he repeatedly turned to watch the gleam of the gun barrel as the hunter rounded the corner and started down the river bank. He saw him leave the line of the fence and disappear in the thicket. "Goin' straight for the sumac," muttered Abram. "It's likely I'm a fool for not stayin' right beside him past that point, and yet I made it fair and plain, and he passed his word 'at he wouldn't touch the birds." He untied Nancy and for the second time started toward the sumac. He had been plowing carefully, his attention divided between the mare and the corn, but he uprooted half that row, for his eyes wandered to the Cardinal's home as if he were fascinated, and his hands were shaking with undue excitement as he gripped the plow handles. At last he stopped Nancy and stood gazing eagerly toward the river. "It must be jest about the sumac," he whispered. "Lord, but I'll be glad to see the old gun barrel gleamin' safe to the other side of it." There was a thin puff of smoke, and a screaming echo went rolling and reverberating down the Wabash. Abram's eyes widened, and a curious whiteness settled on his lips. He stood as if incapable of moving. Clang! Clang! came Maria's second warning. The trembling slid from him, and his muscles hardened. There was no trace of rheumatic stiffness in his movements. With a bound he struck the chain traces from the single tree at Nancy's heels. He caught the hames, leaped on her back, and digged his heels into her side. He stretched along her neck like an Indian and raced across the cornfield. Nancy's 20 years had slipped from her as her master's 60 had from him. Without understanding the emergency, she knew that he required all the speed there was in her. With the trace trains rattling and beating on her heels, she stretched out until she fairly swept the young corn as she raced for the sumac. Once Abram straightened and slipped a hand into his pocket, drew out a formidable jackknife, opening it as he rode. When he reached the fence, he almost flew over Nancy's head. He went into a fence corner, and with a few slashes severed a stout hickory withe, stripping the leaves and topping it as he leaped the fence. He grasped this ugly weapon, his eyes dark with anger as he appeared before the hunter, who supposed him at the other side of the field. Did you shoot at that redbird?" he roared, as his gun was at the sportsman's shoulder, and he was still peering among the bushes. Denial seemed useless. "Yes, I did," he replied, and made a pretense of turning to the sumac again. There was a forward impulse of Abram's body. "Hit him?" he demanded with awful calm. "Thought I had, but I guess I only winged him." Abram's fingers closed around his club. At the sound of his friend's voice, the Cardinal came darting through the bushes, a wavering flame, and swept so closely to him for protection that a wing almost brushed his cheek. "See here! See here!" shrilled the bird in deadly panic. There was not a cut feather on him. Abram's relief was so great that he seemed to shrink an inch in height. "Young man, you better thank your God you missed that bird," he said solemnly, "for if you'd a killed him, I'd a mawed the stick to ribbons on you, and I'm a'most afraid I wouldn't a knowed then when to quit." He advanced a step in eagerness as the hunter, mistaking his motive, levelled his gun. "Drop that!" shouted Abram as he broke through the bushes that clung to him, tore the clothing from his shoulders, and held him back. "Drop that! Don't you dare point a weapon at me, on my own premises, and after you passed your word." "Your word!" repeated Abram with withering scorn, his white, quivering old face terrible to see. "Young man, I've got a couple things I'd like to say to you. You're shaped like a man, and you're dressed like a man, and yet the smartest person living would take you for anything but an egg-sucking dog this minute. All the time God ever spent on you was wasted, and your mother had the same luck. I suppose God's used to havin' creatures 'at He's made go wrong, but I pity your mother. Goodness knows a woman suffers and works enough over her children, and then to fetch a boy to man's estate and have him, of his own free will and accord, to be a liar. Young man, truth is the cornerstone of the temple of character. Nobody can put up a good building without a solid foundation, and you can't do a solid character building with a lie at the base. A man that's a liar ain't fit for anything. Can't trust him in no sphere or relation of life, or in any way, shape, or manner. You passed out your word, like a man, and like a man I took it and went off trusting you, and you failed me. Like as not that squirrel story was a lie too. Have you got a sick friend who is needin' squirrel broth?" The hunter shook his head. "No, that wasn't true either? I'll own you make me curious. Would you mind telling me what was your idea in cooking up that squirrel story?" The hunter spoke with effort. "I suppose I wanted to do something to make you feel small," he admitted in a husky voice. "You wanted to make me feel small?" repeated Abram wonderingly. "Lord, Lord, young man, did you ever hear a boomerang? It's a kind o' weapon used in Borneo, or Australy, or some o' them furrin parts, and it's so made 'at the heathens can pitch it, and it cuts a circle and comes back to the fellow 'at throwed. I can't see myself, and I don't know how small I'm lookin', but I'd rather lose 10 years o' my life than to have anybody catch me lookin' as little as you do right now. I guess we could look the same way we feel in this world. I'm feelin' near the size o' Goliath at present, but your size is such 'at hustles me to see any man in you at all, and you wanted to make me feel small. My oh my! And you're so young yet, too. And if it hadn't a compassed a matter o' breaking your word, what would you want to kill the redbird for, anyhow? Who give you rights to go round takin' such beauty and joy out of the world? Who do you think made this world, and the things 'at's in it? Maybe it's your notion 'at somebody your size whittled from a block o' wood, scattered a little sand for earth, stuck a few seeds for trees, and started the oceans with a waterin' pot. I don't know what paved streets and stall feedin's do for a man, but for any one 'at's lived 60 year on the ground knows 'at this whole old earth is jest teemin' with work, and 'at's too big for anything but a God, and a mighty big God at that. You don't ever need to bother none about discoveries of science, for if science don't prove 'at the earth was a red-hot slag broken from the sun, 'at balled and cooled flyin' through space till the force o' gravity caught it and held it, it doesn't prove what the sun broke from, or why it balled and didn't cool. Sky over your head, earth under your foot, trees around you, and river there, all full o' life 'at you ain't no mortal right to touch, 'cause God made it, an' it's His. Course I know He said distinct 'at a man was to have dominion over the beasts o' the fields an' the fowls o' the air, an' that means 'at you're free to smash a copperhead instead of lettin' it sting you. Means 'at you're better to shoot a wolf than to let it carry off your lambs. Means that it's right to kill a hawk to save your chickens, but God knows 'at shootin' a redbird just to see feathers fly isn't havin' dominion over anything, it's just makin' a plumb beast o' yourself. Passes me how you can face up to the Almighty an' draw a bead on a thing like that. Takes more gall than I got. God never made anything prettier than that bird, an' He must have been proud o' the job. Just cast your eyes on it there. Ever seen anything so runnin' over with dainty, pretty, coaxin' ways? Little red creatures, full o' history, too. Ever think o' that? Last year's bird, hatched hereabout, like as not, went south for winter, an' made friends 'at's been feedin' an' teachin' it to trust mankind. Back this spring in a night, an' struck that sumac over a month ago. Broke me all up, first time I ever set eyes on it. Biggest, reddest redbird I ever saw, an' just a master hand at King's English. Talk plain as you can. Don't know what he said down south, but you can bank on it, it was somethin' pretty fine. When he settled here he was discoursin' on the weather, an' he talked it out about proper. He said, 'Wet year,' just like that. He got the wet just as good as I can, an' if he drawed on the year out a little, still any blockhead could 'a told what he was sayin', an' in a voice just as clear as a bell. Then he got lovesick, an' begged for company until he broke me all up. An' if I'd been a hen redbird, I wouldn't 'a been so long comin'. Had me pulverized in less'n no time. Then a little hen comes along an' stops with him, an' 'twas like organ playin' prayers to hear him tell her how he loved her. Now they got a nest full o' the cunningest little topknot babies, an' he's splittin' the echoes, callin' for the whole neighborhood to come see 'em, he's so mortal proud. Stakes my life he's never been fired on afore. He's pretty near wild with narvousness, but he's got too much spunk to leave his family an' go off an' hide from creatures like you. There's no caution in him. Look at him tearin' around you to give you another chance. I felt too rheumatically to tackle field work this spring until he come along, an' the fire o' his coat in spring got me warmed up, an' I ain't been in years. Work's gone like it was greased, an' my soul's been singin' for joy o' life an' happiness every minute o' the time since he come. Been carryin' him grub to that top rail once an' twice a day for the last month, an' I can go in 3 feet o' him. My wife comes to see him an' brings him stuff, an' we about worship him. Who are you to come along an' wipe out his joy in life an' our joy in him for just nothin'? You'd 'a left him to rot on the ground if you'd hit him, an' me an' Maria loved him so. Did you ever stop to think how full this world is of things to love, if your heart's just big enough to let 'em in? We love to live for the beauty of things surroundin' us an' the joy we take in bein' among them. And it's my belief 'at the way to make folks love us is for us to be able to precipitate what they can do. If a man's puttin' his heart an' soul an' blood an' a beefsteak and bones into paintin' pictures. You can talk farmin' to him all day, and he's dumb, but just show him 'at you see what he's a drivin' at in his work, and he'll love you like a brother. Whatever anybody succeeds in, it's success 'cause they so love it 'at they put their best of themselves into it, and so lovin' what they do is lovin' them. It would about kill a painter man to put the best of himself into a picture, and then have some fellow like you come along and pour your turpentine on it just to see the paint run. And I think it must pretty well use God up to figger out how to make color a thing like that bird, and then to have you walk up and shoot the little red heart out of it, just to prove 'at you can. He's the very life of this river bank. I'd as soon see you dig up the underbrush and dry up the river and spoil the picture they make against the sky, as to have you drop the redbird. He's the red life of the whole thing. God must have made him when his heart was pulsin' hot with love, the lust of creatin' incomparable things, and he just saw how pretty it would be to dip his featherin's into the blood he was puttin' in his veins. To my mind, ain't no better way to love and worship God than to protect and precipitate these fine gifts he's given for our joy and use. Worshippin' that bird's a kind o' religion to me. Gettin' the beauty from the sky and the trees and the grass and the water 'at God made is nothin' but doin' him homage. Whole earth's a sanctuary you can worship from sky above to grass underfoot. Course each man has his particular altar. Mine's in that cabin up at the bend of the river. Maria lives there. God never did cleaner work 'an when he made Maria, lovin' her's sacrament. She's so clean and pure and honest and big-hearted. In 40 year I've never just durst brace right up to Maria and try to put in words what she means to me. Never saw anything as beautiful or as good. No flowers as fragrant and smelly as her hair on the pillow. Never tapped a bee tree with honey sweet as her lips a twitchin' with a love quiver. Ain't a bird along the old Wabash with a voice up to hers. Love of God ain't broader in her kindness. When she's been home to see her folks, I've been so hungry for her that I've gone to her closet and kissed the hem of her skirts more'n once. I've never yet dared kiss her feet, but I've always wanted to. I've laid out at the first she dies I'll do it then. And Maria would cry her eyes out if you would 'a hit that redbird. Your trappin's look like you could shoot. I guess 'twas God that made that shot fly the mark. I guess—" "If you can stop, for the love of mercy, do it!" cried the hunter. His face was sickly white, his temples wet with sweat, and his body trembling. "I can't endure any more. I don't suppose you think I've any human instincts at all, but I have a few, and I see the way to arouse more. You probably won't believe me, but I'll never kill another innocent harmless thing, and I'll never lie again so long as I live." He leaned his gun against the thorn tree, and dropped the remainder of his hunter's outfit beside it on the ground. "I don't seem a fit subject to have dominion," he said. "I'll leave those things for you, and thank you for what you've done for me." There was a crash through the bushes, a leap over the fence, and Abram and the Cardinal were alone. The old man sat suddenly on a fallen limb of the sycamore. He was almost dazed with astonishment. He held up his shaking hands and watched them wonderingly, and then he cupped one over each trembling knee to steady himself. He outlined his dry lips with the tip of his tongue and breathed in heavy gusts. He glanced toward the thorn tree. "Left his gun," he hoarsely whispered, "and it's fine as a fiddle. Lock, stock, and barrel, just a shinin'. And all that heap o' leather fixin's must 'a' cost a lot o' money. Said he wasn't fit to use 'em. Leapt the fence like a panther, and cut dirt across the cornfield, and left me a gun. Well, well, well! Wonder what I said. I must have been almost fierce." "See here!" shrilled the Cardinal. Abram looked over him carefully. He was quivering with fear, but in no way injured. "My, but that was a close call, old fellow," said Abram. "A minute later and our fun would have been over and the summer just spoiled. Wonder if you knew what it meant, and if you'll be gun shy after this. Land knows I hope so. For a few more such doses you'd just lay me up." He gathered himself together at last, set the gun over the fence, and climbed after it. Caught Nancy, who had feasted to plethora on young corn. He fastened up the trace chains and climbed to her back, laid the gun across his lap and rode to the barn. He attended the mare with particular solicitude, and bathed his face and hands in the water trough to make himself a little more presentable to Maria. He started to the house, but had only gone a short way when he stopped, and after standing in thought for a time, he turned back to the barn and gave Nancy another ear of corn. "After all, it was you, old girl," he said, patting her shoulder. "I never on earth could have made it on time afoot." He was so tired. He leaned for support against her, for the unusual exertion and intense excitement were telling on him sorely, and as he rested he confided to her, "I don't know as I ever in my life was so riled, Nancy. I'm afraid I was a little mite fierce." He exhibited the gun and told the story very soberly at supper time, and Maria was so filled with solicitude for him and the bird, and so indignant at the act of the hunter, that she never said a word about Abram's torn clothing and the hours of patching that would ensue. She sat looking at the gun and thinking intently for a long time, and then she said pityingly, "I don't know just what you could have said that could make a man go off and leave a gun like that. Poor fellow! I do hope, Abram, you didn't come down on him too awful strong. Maybe he lost his mother when he was just a little tyke, and he hasn't had much teaching." Abram was completely worn out and went early to bed, far in the night. Maria felt him fumbling around her face in an effort to learn if she recovered, and as he drew the sheet over her shoulder he muttered in worn and sleepy tones, "I'm afraid there's no use denying it, Maria. I was just mortal fierce." In the sumac the frightened little mother Cardinal was pressing her precious babies close against her breast, and all through the night she kept calling to her mate, "Chook, chook," and was satisfied only when an answering "chip" came. As for the Cardinal, he had learned a new lesson. He had not been under fire before. Never again would he trust anyone carrying a shining thing that belched fire and smoke. He had seen the hunter coming, and had raced home to defend his mate and babies, thus making a brilliant mark of himself, and he would not have deserted them. Only the arrival of the farmer had averted the tragedy in the sumac. He did not learn to use caution for himself, but after that if a gun came down the shining river he sent a warning "cheep" to his mate, telling her to crouch low in the nest and keep very quiet. And then in broken waves of flight, with chirp and flutter, he exposed himself until he lured danger from his beloved ones. When the babies grew large enough for their mother to leave them a short time, she assisted in food hunting, and the Cardinal was not so busy. Then he could find time frequently to mount to the top of the dogwood and cry to the world, "See here! See here!" For the Cardinal babies were splendid. But his music was broken, intermittent, vocalizing now, often uttered past a beakful of food, and interspersed with spasmodic chips if danger threatened his mate and nestlings. Despite all their care, it was not so very long until trouble came to the sumac, and it was all because the firstborn was plainly greedy, much more so than either his little brother or his sister. and he was one day ahead of them in strength. He always pushed himself forward, cried the loudest and longest, and so took the greater part of the food carried to the nest. And one day, while he was still quite awkward and uncertain, he climbed to the edge and reached so far that he fell. He rolled down the river bank, splash, into the water, and a hungry old pickerel, sunning in the weeds, finished him at a snap. He made a morsel so fat, sweet, and juicy that the pickerel lingered close for a week, waiting to see if there would be any more accidents. The Cardinal, hunting grubs in the cornfield, heard the frightened cries of his mate, and dashed to the sumac in time to see the poor little ball of brightly tinted feathers disappear in the water and to hear the splash of the fish. He called in helpless panic and fluttered over the spot. He watched and waited until there was no hope of the nestling coming up. Then he went to the sumac to try to comfort his mate. She could not be convinced that her young one was gone, and for the remainder of the day filled the air with alarmed cries and notes of wailing. The two that remained were surely the envy of birdland. The male baby was a perfect copy of his big crimson father, only his little coat was gray, but it was so highly tinged with red that it was brilliant, and his beak and feet were really red. And how his crest did flare, and how proud and important he felt when he found he could raise and lower it at will. His sister was not nearly so bright as he, and she was almost as greedy as the lost brother. With his father's chivalry, he allowed her to crowd in and take most of the seeds and berries, so that she continually appeared as if she could swallow no more, yet she was constantly calling for food. She took the first flight. Being so greedy, she forgot to be afraid, and actually flew to a neighboring thorn tree to meet the Cardinal coming with food, before she realized what she had done. For once gluttony had its proper reward. She not only missed the bite, but she got her little self mightily well scared. With popping eyes and fear-flattened crest, she clung to the thorn limb, shivering at the depths below. And it was the greatest comfort when her brother, plucking up courage, and came sailing across to her. But of course she could not be expected to admit that. When she saw how easily he did it, she flared her crest, turned her head indifferently, and inquired if he did not find flying a very easy matter, once he mustered the courage to try it. And she made him very much ashamed indeed, because he had allowed her to be the first to leave the nest. From the thorn tree they worked their way to the dead sycamore, but there the lack of foliage made them so conspicuous that their mother almost went into spasms from fright, and she literally drove them back to the sumac. The Cardinal was so inordinately proud, and made such a brave showing of teaching them to fly, bathe, and all other things necessary for young birds to know, that it was a great mercy they escaped with their lives. He mastered many lessons, but he never could be taught to be quiet and conceal himself. With explosive chips, flaming and flashing, he met dangers that sent all other birds beside the shining water racing to cover. Concealment he scorned, and repose he never knew. It was a summer full of rich experience for the Cardinal. After these first babies were raised and had flown, 2 more nests were built, and 2 other broods flew from the sumac. By fall the Cardinal was the father of a small flock, and they were each one neat, trim, beautiful river birds. He had lived through spring with its perfumed air, pale flowers, and burning heart hunger. He had known summer in its golden mood, with forest pungent with spice bush and sassafras, festooned with wild grapes, woodbine, and bittersweet, carpeted with velvet moss, and starry mandrake peeping from beneath green shades, the never-ending murmur of the shining river. the rich fulfillment of love's fruition. Now it was fall, and all the promises of spring were accomplished. The woods were glorious in autumnal tints. There were ripened red haws, black haws, and wild grapes, only waiting for severe frosts, nuts rattling down, scurrying squirrels, and the rabbit's flash of gray and brown. The waysides were bright with the glory of the goldenrod, and royal with the purple of asters and ironwort. There was a rustling of falling leaves, the flitting of velvety butterflies, the whirl of wings trained southward, and the call of the king crow gathering his followers. Then to the Cardinal came the intuition that it was time to lead his family to the orange orchard. One day they flamed and rioted up and down the shining river, raced over the cornfield and tilted on the sumac. The next, a black frost had stripped its antlered limbs. Stark and deserted it stood, a picture of loneliness. O bird of wonderful plumage and human-like song, what a precious thought of divinity to create such beauty and music for our pleasure! Brave songster of flaming coat, too proud to hide your flashing beauty, too fearless to be cautious of many dangers that beset you. From the top of the morning we greet you and hail you King of Birdland, at your imperious command. See here! See here! End of chapter 5. End of the Song of the Cardinal by Stratton-Porter.